does nothing better than a game of hockey for making you feel on top of the world. What if this is your last term at school? It isn't over yet. Still, the day will come, and it's as well to be ready for it. And in a North of England school, one girl at least had ideas of her own. Kathleen Kemp wanted to do as her friend Janet was already doing, to train for mental nursing. But her parents were more than doubtful of the wisdom of her choice. They had a quite natural anxiety for her well-being, and a mental hospital was about the last place they would have thought of. As Mr. Kemp said, was it really the place for a sensitive girl like Kathleen? I mean, it must be so depressing and hopeless. There was no doubting her keenness, but did she really know what she was doing?
I realize I don't know much about the retreat yet, but Janet loves it. You know, Janet and I shared most things at school, and I'd love to be doing the same as her. The people you see are there to be cured, and not just placed behind bars, as most folks seem to think. Actually, Janet says she found it difficult at first to tell which were the patients and which were just visitors. But the patients are all different, and their case is so interesting. It seems to be so satisfying to help them get well again. I don't mind the hard work, long hours, or even night duty, and working weekends. So you will understand, won't you? And at least let me try it. I'm sure it's such a worthwhile service.
Would her parents see it as she did? Would they realize how strongly she wanted to help those who were so helpless? Would they let her take that great badge of service, the nurse's uniform? Well, Kathleen's parents did understand. They found out for themselves the desperate need of more mental nurses, and they discovered their fears for her welfare were groundless. And so the schoolgirl, suddenly transformed into a young woman, packs her bag and heads for York. A young woman with a clear purpose and a wish to serve. Fortunate in having parents with the wisdom to support her in a choice not lightly made. All of us will be familiar with some at least of the glories of this ancient city, its walls, its many churches, and its minster, surrounded by countless narrow streets, historic doorways, courts and corners, living history. And it is perhaps right that such a city should have within its boundaries, placed as it is only half a mile beyond the ancient walls, a mental hospital with as long and proud a history as the retreat. And to its gate comes Kathleen, in the first steps of her new adventure. All the visions, the hopes and fears that have been hers in her last terms at school crowd upon her now as she comes face to face with the beginning of the career of her choosing. Where will Janet be? Will she see her soon? She said she might be off duty, and of course she'd find her as soon as she could. But first there'll be matron to meet. You hear such frightening stories of some hospital matrons. Well, here it comes. Kathleen's anxieties, however, were soon dispelled. Here was a welcome, warm and friendly. Janet had said the whole place was friendly, But you never really quite know till you've been to a place, do you? Soon Matron was telling her of some of the things in store for her, of some of the history and the pioneering tradition of the hospital, of William Tuke, the York tea merchant, who founded it in 1796. In days when the mentally ill were treated with great severity and often cruelty. William Tuke was one of the very first to realize their need of loving care and a feeling of security. And here was an aerial view of the hospital, showing how it stands in its own grounds of 60 acres, a mile from the center of the city. Kathleen heard, though she knew already, that the hospital has 270 beds and a nursing staff of 100. This high ratio is maintained so that the nurses should not be overburdened with daily routine, but should have time to develop a close interest in those who are dependent on them. In the work of nursing the mentally sick, a setting of beauty was of great importance. The flowers, the rose walks, and the extensive lawns were all part of the plan to heal the troubled mind. Relatives and friends of the patients are welcomed whenever possible, and in the spacious rooms and corridors, as well as in the extensive grounds, there is ample room for quiet, friendly contact. But though beauty might be the background, only knowledge, hand in hand with loving care, could bring relief. Much would be demanded of Miss Kemp, but nursing service given from the heart would bring a rich reward. And here at last was a uniform of her own. How proudly she'd wear it. Very soon now, the picture of herself she had so often conjured up would become a reality. A uniform not lightly to be worn. To her it would be a sign that she had dedicated her life to her less fortunate fellows, and she would do her very utmost to live up to her resolution. And here was Joan. She'd heard of Joan from Janet, to take her to her own little corner of the hospital in the nurse's home. The first anxieties were passing. She'd cleared the first jumps. It seemed a rather big place, but it looked attractive, both outside and in. She was sure she'd made the right choice, but she'd be jolly glad to see Janet and let herself go. And there surely was Janet. Now she could really relax and face the morrow with an easy mind. Here indeed a new world is waiting. Kathleen will find herself faced with the responsibilities of nurses everywhere. Beds to be made, patients to be washed and cared for, temperatures to be taken, meals and medicines to be given, and all the other duties of a general hospital ward to be learned. She finds herself quite early in touch with the laboratory, which supports all the clinical work. In this fully equipped department, the usual testing, such as is done in all hospitals, is carried out in order to establish the physical condition of each patient on admission. At the same time, research is constantly being undertaken to discover how mental disorders may be related to bodily illness. The apparatus being used here is for making highly accurate estimates of blood content, the composition of which is measured to very fine limits by means of photoelectric cells. The retreat was one of the first teaching mental hospitals in the country, and Kathleen spends a good deal of time in her first few weeks in the training school. Here, under the guidance of the sister tutor, she begins by learning some of the rudiments of nursing from the hospital superintendent and other specialists. Here, theoretical knowledge will be added to her growing experience gained during her 3-year course. Kathleen will also become familiar with this highly colored corpse, upon which the most astonishing operations can be performed with no trouble whatever. Extra time is, of course, given to the study of mental processes and mental illnesses, and to the several and widely differing techniques for dealing with them. The medical superintendent, the clinical director, and other members of the staff of doctors all give much of their time to the training school. Among the techniques to be found in a mental hospital is that of insulin therapy. Here, at 6 o'clock in the morning, in wards with curtains drawn to keep out the strong daylight, insulin doses are being prepared and checked. insulin coma treatment, to give it its full title, offers the greatest likelihood of relief and cure for some patients whose illness is of a deep-seated nature. The effect of the insulin injection is to induce a coma in which the patient is allowed to remain for an hour or so. In this condition, the mind has a chance to be completely relaxed, and the functions of the brain have the opportunity of, as it were, setting out on a new path when consciousness returns. During the period of coma, the patient perspires heavily and requires frequent attention from the nurses. Coma will ultimately be brought to an end by the administration of glucose, and during this same coma period, doses of concentrated glucose solution are prepared, either for administration by the mouth or, as in this case, by intravenous injection. In this, as in so much of mental hospital work, the patient is completely dependent on the watchfulness and devotion of the nurses. And in this treatment, it is important that as he returns to consciousness, he is quickly reassured by the presence of those who have come to be his nearest friends. In some cases, on coming out of the coma, the patient is given further strong concentrations of glucose to prevent his lapsing back into a comatose state. During all these operations, therefore, it is of the utmost importance that no change in his condition is allowed to go unnoticed by the nursing staff. With the administration of the glucose over, the curtains may be drawn back so that daylight may assist in the waking process. In a very short time, breakfast is ready, and nurse and patients can resume their normal and steadily growing friendship. And with breakfast over, patients will be dressed and ready for a day full of activity, in which Kathleen will share, for her duties do not restrict her to the wards. A great many patients are suffering from what is generally known as mental depression, and a special technique aimed at removing this depression, whilst minimizing the physical strain, is that of electrotherapy. Again, Kathleen has the responsibility of reassuring the patient and of seeing her through the treatment. In this case, oxygen equipment will be required because, before the shock, an injection of a relaxant drug will be given. The administration of this drug is a recent development in electrotherapy, and it has the effect of producing a muscular reaction to the electric current. In other cases, no anesthetic is required. The high-frequency current itself produces instant unconsciousness, with no sensation whatever felt by the patient. After the shock has been given, the patient is wheeled on the bed to the recovery room next door. Recovery usually takes about 20 minutes, and during this period there is constant supervision with, again, great care taken to see that the patient is aware of loving care and attention the moment consciousness returns. Another form of treatment goes under the rather frightening name of psychotherapy. Briefly, it consists in the doctor and patient considering all the events in a patient's life to find any stress or strain that may have caused the breakdown. It is done either as the main treatment or, after another kind of treatment has produced recovery, to minimize the chance of relapse in the future. Full use is made of the beautiful grounds, and Kathleen is often called on to escort old and young along the many paths. Usually, these walks are very pleasant and without incident, but nurses have always to be alive to the changing moods of their patients and ready to deal with sudden impulses that sometimes come to them. In the treatment of minds that are strained or depressed, the physical condition of the sufferer must also be considered. And often, muscles that have become tensed and unrelaxed have to be coaxed back into normal action. In a separate occupational therapy building overlooking the cricket field, and outside it whenever possible, patients are encouraged to restore their ability to concentrate on something outside themselves by doing something of a practical kind. As a result, many patients acquire a new hobby during their stay in the hospital. Sometimes, of course, the thing created meets with the disapproval even of one's fellow workers, and in this case, an ounce of help is worth a pound of sympathy. In another part of the hospital is the physiotherapy department. Here is, in effect, a small gymnasium, where exercises pure and simple are given, and where the familiar bicycle, rowing and other movements can be simulated. The objective here is the same as in the occupational therapy department, the retraining of tensed muscles. This department offers the usual diathermy treatments, using the most up-to-date equipment, and patients may also have the benefit and enjoyment of that most soothing of attention, the ministrations of the masseurs. In recent years, art therapy has taken a valued place among the techniques for encouraging self-expression and self-release. Efforts are made to induce all patients to draw or paint, no matter how crudely. Some have drawn nothing since they left school, probably 50 years ago, and the results can, of course, be childish and amusing. Others have proved quite talented artists. Here again, Kathleen is encouraged to talk with her patients and discuss their work. Sometimes there come creations that are dramatic, puzzling, or revealing. Sometimes themselves providing helpful clues to guide the doctors in their probing of the unconscious mind. But it may be also that in discussion with the patients who create them, Kathleen will hear a chance remark that may reveal some secret that is hindering a return to normality. Art and occupational therapies can be said to combine in the production of glove puppets, which have the added advantage of introducing an element of humor, a valuable element in any cure. In the retreat are opportunities of doing almost everything a nurse in a general hospital would do. For although it is a mental hospital, it has its own well-equipped X-ray and other departments. There is always the risk of damaged or broken limbs in such a large hospital, due mainly to patients falling awkwardly. This department, in the care of a doctor, is frequently in use, not just because of broken limbs, but because it can supply evidence of other kinds, for resident or visiting surgeons who can operate in the retreat's own operating theatre. It is important that these facilities should be available under the one roof, so that no patient is faced with new experiences away from the supervision of the mental hospital staff. Nursing cannot be effective without adequate opportunity for nurses too to relax. Their own home, the nurses' home, is a pleasant building in attractive grounds with a view from the upper windows right across the city. The nurses' rooms are well equipped with comfortable beds, hot and cold water, individual wall heaters, a place for the boyfriend's picture and other necessary furniture. In the communal rooms below, there is ample opportunity for fun and games of every kind, quiet or boisterous, with suitable settings for the 4 T's: tea, talk, table tennis and television. There is, of course, a well-stocked library containing books to suit all tastes, which is kept well up to date. It is but a few inches from the excitements of the Invisible Man himself to that other, equally exciting part of him, his invisible mind. The nursing staff have their own tennis courts beside the home to supplement the facilities in the hospital grounds. And young men have sometimes to wait for their partners at the retreat as anywhere else. They have also clear ideas on how to express their disapproval. Though it's tennis they're watching, this spectator is interested in something quite different. The retreat can at any rate boast one quite unusual amenity for the staff. This fine little swimming bath stands in the grounds of the nurse's home, no more than 100 yards from the building itself. It is used by both staff and patients at regulated times. There are 2 dances: staff dances and dances when nurses, visitors and patients join in very friendly informality. Throughout each day in the life of the retreat nurse, there are opportunities for friendly personal contacts. They are a vital and calculated part of the treatment of the mentally sick. Many of the patients are people who have lost their grip on life, lost all sense of security. They are alone, shut up within themselves, a prey to all the anxieties and fears that other people are able to keep at a distance. And William Tuke was one of the first to realize not only that physical restraint or violence was worse than useless, but that physical treatments alone were insufficient. He knew that body and mind were inextricably bound up, that the mentally sick also needed beauty, beauty of surroundings, beauty of companionship. Since the hospital is concerned with the whole personality of its patients, frequent staff meetings are held when doctors, therapists, and nurses can share their experiences and findings. To these meetings, Kathleen can bring experiences that may be of great value. Observations of patients' behavior, scraps of conversation, confidences shared during treatment periods or leisure times. Nothing is left out. The discussion may begin with a report from the radiologist, but nothing can be considered in isolation. Everyone must remember they are not dealing with cases, but with people. Work of this kind, as Kathleen knew before she began, makes pretty heavy demands on the mental and spiritual energy of the staff. And the basis on which William Tuke's many activities were built was an unshakable religious faith. It was a recognition of the Christian obligation to care for those in need, a recognition of the sanctity of human personality, of the fact that all men were of equal value in the sight of God, and all somehow were bound up in the suffering of any one. The strength of that foundation is never forgotten. The retreat began and is continued as a venture of faith. Tony, like many others, caught up in the whirl and stress of everyday life, and subjected to strains he couldn't bear, suffered the inevitable breakdown. Not many years ago, his chances of being cured within 12 months would have been small. But today, he is being discharged only 4 months after admission. This is the moment his many friends have prayed for, the friends of his home life and the many new friends he leaves behind in the hospital. But even as he moves back into the stream of life, others are struggling with adversity and in some cases going down. And it is to hospitals such as the retreat that many can turn with hope and confidence. Clouds there will always be, but thanks to the Janets and Kathleens of this world, sufferers from mental illness have the chance of escaping its worst features. Will you take up this very satisfying career and help to bring light through the clouds?